Hello everyone, this is Michelle Upton here, and today I'm making 3 very different cards using 2 Hero Arts products. Here they are. These 2 are the Celebrate Stamp Set and the Celebrate Layering Stencil Set, which coordinate with each other, but I'm actually going to be using them separately today. This first card I'm making, I think it'd be great for a party. It could be for a birthday party, it could be for a congratulations party, it could be for lots of things that you want to celebrate with a party. I'm starting with the first stencil and I'm just going to adhere it to a sticky mat that I've got in my Misty here. I'm going to be using these 4 inks. I'm using the cornflower ink over this stencil with the strings and the stars. And then with the banners, I'm using the Paradise ink. Then on the next layer that adds some details to the banners and some more banners, I'm using the pink grapefruit ink. And then for the last layer, which adds some little tassels, I'm using azalea ink. I thought these were just fun colours for a party card. I've got the 2 stamps that say Let's and Party, and I'm trying real hard to line them up here. I've got my head in the way. I'm actually tipping my Misty up so I can see really clearly that they're lined up against the grid lines on my Misty, just to make sure that they're nice and straight. So you got to get a view of my grey hairs there, I'm sure. Oh dear. I'm using the azalea ink to stamp the sentiment, and because I want the sentiment to be nice and bold on the card, I've stamped it a couple of times to get a really good image. Now I'm using the nesting postage stamp infinity dies to cut this panel down. I'm just going to hold the die in place with a little bit of masking tape here. And then I will run it through my Platinum 6 die cutting machine from Spellbinders. So just a little tip, when you're cutting something like a rectangle or a square with a straight edge in your die cutting machine, put it on an angle like I have, because then you won't get the really loud bang as the straight line goes through your die cutting machine. Okay, so now I'm just going to remove the masking tape that's holding the die in place. I'm just making sure that I remove it very carefully so I don't tear anything. And out pops my little postage stamp shaped panel. Now I'm going to add a layer behind this, and I thought I would use the coordinating cardstock to the azalea ink, so I'm just grabbing that here. I'm just going to cut that down so that it is slightly bigger than the panel, but slightly smaller than my card base. So all 3 of my cards today, they're going on to card bases that are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Now, I didn't want to waste all of that azalea cardstock that wouldn't be shown. The stuff that's in the middle of the panel there. So I've cut the middle out with one of those postage stamp dies, and I'm just going to adhere my stenciled panel over the top of that with a little bit of scrap cardstock in the middle, so nobody's ever going to know that I kept a whole lot of my azalea cardstock for another project. Hooray! See, it's all hidden. Alright, so now I'm just making sure that it's all lined up nice and neat, making sure that it is adhered down well. So just pressing it down nice and firmly, and then I decided that it needed just a little bit more detail, so I've grabbed a white gel pen and I'm just going around the edges of that azalea panel, just drawing on some faux stitching lines, and I was quite happy with the result. So that's that card done. A fun, happy party card that you could use for a kid's birthday party or any party really. So there we go. Now, for my second card, I decided to go a bit softer, a little bit more pastel. I thought it'd be good for a baby card, so the colours that I'm using on this one are Peony, Dandelion, Arctic and Dusty Blue. Again, I'm starting with a stencil, so pretty much the same process that I did for the first card, just with paler colours. I'm starting with the Dusty Blue, and then I'll move on to the other 3 colours, just adding them not very heavily. I sort of inked up the dandelion ink a little bit more heavily than the others because it is a pale colour and I don't want it to fade into the background. But with the peony and the Arctic and the Dusty Blue, I was quite light-handed with them, but that was intentional because, as I said, I sort of had this as a baby card in mind when I was making it. So I wanted nice, gentle pastel colours. All right, so just adding the last ink now to the last layer. Again, very light-handed there. Now, with this one, I didn't want to add a dark sentiment. I usually do like sentiments that are very legible. I like sentiments that show a lot of contrast, but I didn't want a dark sentiment here. So I've grabbed out this Celebrate die, and this is from It's Our Anniversary Stamp and Cut set, and I've cut both of the pieces out from the middle. So I haven't actually separated the two dies from at this point. I will in just a tick, but I wanted to cut out the shadow die as well as the word at the same time. But now I'm separating out the dies. I'm just going to twist the middle one to separate them out. And that'll pop it out nice and easy. So after separating the dies, I used the shadow die to cut the shadow from Arctic cardstock. You can see that on the left there. And I'm now adding some tape runner adhesive to my stenciled panel without the word Celebrate in it. I'm going to adhere that to my card base. And now I'm just adhering that shadow layer into the negative space. Now, once I've done that, I will be taking the Celebrate word that is just sitting in the top right-hand corner at the moment. I'm going to remove the shadow layer from around it, and I'm going to remove all the little bits and pieces inside the letters in that die cut. And then I will adhere that to the shadow piece. So it's kind of like the eclipse technique. I've always had a problem with the eclipse technique in that I really like sentiments to be super legible. So by doing the eclipse technique, but adding in a shadow layer around the word that you're using, it still gives the appeal of having the pattern in the background continuous across the sentiment, as well as across the background, but you don't lose the legibility of the word because that shadow layer helps improve the legibility. So I left that with a little paperweight over the top for a little while, and now that card is done. I thought about adding some bling, but I really didn't think it needed it. So that's my second card all done. So here's a nice close-up of that, and you can see how the pattern continues across the sentiment. Now, my third card is very different again. For this one, I wanted to go for a much more elegant look. Now, I'm starting with treasured cardstock from Spellbinders, and here it is. And I've used the Rose Gold Assorted Pack, and I chose a piece of the matte metallic cardstock. This is really beautiful cardstock. I love it. I made sure that I added lots and lots of anti-static powder to it, because with this card, I'm using the Celebrate stamp instead of the stencils this time, and I'm stamping it in embossing and watermark ink from Hero Arts. I'm making sure that I ink it up really, really well, and I'm going to press down on the lid of my Misty really, really well, going over the image really carefully with my fingers to make sure that I haven't missed anything. And you can see when I hold up the Misty that you can see the impression on that cardstock on the metallic cardstock on the shiny. So I'm going to be adding some copper embossing powder from Hero Arts. And silly me, I tend not to use my specialty embossing powders very much. I tend to stick to white embossing powder, so it's really nice to pull out this embossing powder. It doesn't get very much love, so I really needed to get it out more often because it's absolutely gorgeous. All right, so I'm just funneling the excess embossing powder back into the tub, and I'm heating up my heat tool to make sure I can melt this embossing powder relatively quickly. But you'll see that I didn't avoid warping the cardstock. Metallic cardstocks are much more likely to warp with heat embossing than matte cardstocks are because of the coating that they have on the metallic surface. You can see it's curling right now. But that's okay. I just needed to make sure I flattened it out a little bit afterwards. So you can see I'm pressing it down onto my relatively cold glass work mat to try and flatten it out a little bit. But it'll be flattened out a little bit more because I'm going to die cut it. Now, at the moment, I've grabbed out some numbers. These are number 0 and the number 6 fancy dies. I've actually used some glitter paper. This is the Hero Arts glitter paper from the fall pack in the colour copper. And I've die cut the 6 and the 0 just because I have a few people that I know turning 60 this year, so I thought I'd have a card ready to go for one of them. So I've also pulled out my rectangles infinity dies and chosen a rectangle to go around my stamped and embossed background here to cut it out so that I can have a little bit of a white border around it. And Of course, this action of die cutting it will help to flatten out this panel a little bit more. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm going to be stamping a sentiment to go over the die cut 60 as well, but I'm also embossing it in copper embossing powder to match. This sentiment is from the Let's Celebrate stamp set, which is a really fabulous stamp set full of birthday sentiments. I got a little bit of embossing powder where I really didn't want it. It was sticking, so I just used a little wooden skewer that I keep on my desk to get rid of the tiny little stray pieces, and then I used my heat tool to melt that embossing powder. Made sure I put the loose powder away before I do that, because you don't want to go blowing that all over your desk. Ask me how I know. Okay, so that seems to be melted just about and all good to go. I'm going to be using my paper trimmer to trim this down, and I've cut it relatively close to the letters because I didn't want it to cover up too much of the numbers in the middle of my card. Didn't want it to cover up the glitter. And just to add a tiny little bit more detail, I decided to cut little banner ends into the ends of this little strip. So just a little V shape on either end, just for a little something something really, just something extra. Okay, so now that I've got that just about done, using my little sharp scissors here to make sure that is nice and neat and tidy. So all that is left is to assemble this card. So as you can see, this copper panel is a lot flatter now, and excuse me, I've got the card base is Nina 110 pound solar white cardstock, so that will keep this layout relatively flat. I'm going to adhere my numbers. I'm using liquid glue because sometimes adhering things over the top of embossing powder and also adhering things over the top of slick metallic cardstock, the tape runner adhesive doesn't adhere as well. The tape runner adhesive is great on the back of cardstock that's not coated, but the front of the cardstock, I thought I really needed the strength of the Hero Arts Precision Glue here. So I've stuck that down, making sure I'm getting rid of any stray little bits of glue, making sure they're nice and straight. And I'm using my paperweight here over the top to hold it in place before I add my stamped and embossed sentiment over the top. Now I've added some foam adhesive to the back of this sentiment strip, just to add a little bit of dimension, and then I'll just be adhering that right over the top of the glittery 60. So once that is adhered, I'll try and make sure that it's relatively straight. There we go. So now I've got 3 different cards, 3 completely different looks for 3 different parties or celebrations, but all from 2 Hero Arts products that coordinate with each other, but I haven't used them in their coordinating way. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.